When you go to Peru, one of the nice things, it's kind of an endearing quality, when you go up to, if you go in the south to visit Lake Titicaca, which you have probably heard about because it's the highest navigable lake in the world. It's really worth going to. I had read a lot about the culture around there, around the whole area of Lake Titicaca when I was in college, because I studied Spanish in college. It was my major, but I never imagined it was going to be the way it was when we got there. Um, it was much bigger than I had expected. I thought it was going to be this, a lake. I imagined a lake because they call it Lake Titicaca, but it's not a sea either, but it's really big. It's huge. It just goes on forever, and it has these beautiful series of hills and mountains surrounding it. I mean, just the most scenic, uh, picturesque place you've ever seen. I highly recommend it. Now, the funny thing is when you speak to the Peruvians, see um, Lake Titicaca, it lays in the middle of the border between Peru and Bolivia. So the Bolivians have half of it and the Peruvians have the other half of it. And so when you talk to, but they both call it Lake Titicaca. And when you talk to the Peruvians, they'll say, yeah, yeah, half's in Peru and half's in Bolivia. But the Titi is in Peru and the Caca is in Bolivia. They say that every time. So we went over to have our passport stamped to get our 90-day visa. And we went over into Bolivia. And when we were in Bolivia, we spoke to the Bolivians. And yeah, you guessed it, they said the same thing. The Titi belongs to Bolivia and the Caca belongs to Peru. And we said, yeah, I think we heard that somewhere before. So that was kind of funny, but really, I highly recommend it. It's such an inexpensive place to go. I mean, unless you stay at, I don't know, I'm sure there's an expensive hotel there somewhere, but it's pretty cheap there. All of Peru really is, but it's such a beautiful place, and what an experience. You go out on little boats onto the lake, and then there are these floating islands that the people have made. I don't know if you've ever seen these. They're type of canoes. They're made out of like reeds. They actually call it, it's a type of grass that grows right in the lake and along the shores of the lake called totora. And it's a lake, it's a grass that's hollow, and it's about as thick as a straw that you would use to drink soda or something, except it's really long. They cut that and then they tie it together and they make these little, they kind of look like canoes. You've probably seen them on some National Geographic specials. You see them rowing in these canoes. Well, when those, after I don't know how much time, a year or two or three or five, whatever, when they get kind of waterlogged and useless, but they'll still float a little. What they do is they'll take a few of them together and they just put them side by side. They're kind of half floating in the water. They cut some new fresh totora and they lay it on top of it, and that's the beginning of an island. And from there they just keep throwing more until it grows bigger and bigger. And we were on a few of these. You can actually walk on these islands once they get thick enough and they're able to be kind of stable in the water. We went on one that was as small as, I'd say, the first floor of a small house. It was really small, if you think of just the floor part, and it just had these little huts on it. And then we were on other ones that were really big as a town, a small town. And there are lots of them all over the place. You take boats out to them, and they have different tours. Definitely well worth it. There are also solid, real islands in the Lake Titicaca, but those islands are called Uros, U-R-O-S, and those are really you have to go. I was curious as to how far below the Uro was the water, so I stuck my finger down into it, my hand down into it, because it's just grass. It just looks like grass there that you're walking on, and it's the totora, and it's nice and soft. When you walk on it, it's kind of squishy and soft, and but your feet don't go down into it. So I pushed my hand down into it, and about this far down, maybe a foot, I reached the water. I touched the water. So like the water is always right below them. And they explained to us that every 15 days or so, every 2 weeks, they have to throw a new fresh batch of totora on top of the island because it's constantly, slowly sinking. And this is what they sleep on. There's people who live on on these floating islands. It's kind of cold, and you can see their skin is all like wind chapped and red. But a really beautiful place. They eat a lot of fish, obviously, and they have to go to shore to get their other type of vegetables. But I think on some of the islands they're able to actually get some topsoil going somehow, and in some sections, and grow a few vegetables. But a really great experience, not very expensive, and you'll love it. Better than so many things. But I highly recommend going to Lake Titicaca. So stay near the Titi and stay away from the Caca.